To say thank you so much for coming down. He flew down from Boston last night to be with us. He has to fly back up afterwards, and we're just delighted to have you here. So just thank you in advance. So yes, would love some opening comments, and then I have some questions because some things that I've been thinking about in terms of civic responsibility and the role of the public library. Of course, thinking about public schools, public libraries, these institutions. But I wanted to give him some time to talk a little bit about his work. I have some questions, and then hopefully you'll be thinking of questions too as we're talking.
And I do hope the accent doesn't get in the way of being understood today. So it's been 26 years at this point so that I've lived in the US. There's some very important words on the slide behind me, and I just want to start with that. Clearly, the word democracy figures up here. The word education figures up here. Civic responsibility and library all figure up here. So I think the conversation that I'm interested in having with all of you today is really looking at the intersectionality, the intersection, the connectedness of those different disciplines and institutions. And from my own point of view, I think education is under threat. I think democracy is under threat. And I believe only the institutions that care about the public good are the ones that will be able to really push the needle on this and really make a difference. And so, you know, we heard a few of the traditional images of what a library might be as we think of the stereotype earlier, but today it's a little different. And I want to give you a little framework of how I think about the library. It is interesting that Boston Public Library was founded in 1848. So it's a 170-year-old institution. And the question for me is, how do we make what was a big idea in the middle of the 19th century still a big idea in the 21st century, and understand that the sense of urgency may be different, but the strength of emotion and relevance is still as powerful today as it was then. It's still about reading and learning. Reading is a big part of schoolwork. Everybody points to the significance of third grade reading levels as a classic milestone indicator tipping point. If you're successful at that point, it exponentially increases the possibilities of staying successful throughout your school career. If you fall behind at that point, it puts everybody in jeopardy for later on. There's 23 million books and objects in the Boston Public Library's collection. That makes it the third largest collection in the US after, anyone want to guess at the other two? There's one nearby. The Library of Congress. and the other institution is the one that Boston never competes with. New York, thank you. New York, so New York Public Library and the Library of Congress are the only two institutions that have larger collections. But to me, that's not about just about inventory or having a warehouse of books. That's about an opportunity to animate, to bring alive, to unlock, so that everybody can enjoy and benefit from those resources. The second thing, and there are four of these, and then I'll pause when I get through the four. You probably want to ask me to talk about myself and my career as well, but we'll do that during Q&A. So reading and learning, reading and literacy is still the main core of library's mission. Secondly, what we call reference and instruction. The work of working with our patrons, our students, to understand what are their information needs. And this is the one of the four that I think the school libraries, such as they still exist, have actually put most of the emphasis on, is how do we support the curriculum, how do we support the reading needs of the students, and how do we support the research needs of faculty. Reference and instruction. That today is much more about giving people the skills to search using technology responsibly, and less about going to the encyclopedia and reading it back to back, or the phone book, or the funny map of LA in the public library in Chicago. The internet is good for some things, but for many other things, it's not. You know, if you want lots of answers, go Google it. If you want the right answer, go to a library. So the third, that's a cliche at this point, but there's some truth there. The third area really is about the physical space itself. We had the privilege of renovating the Central Library in Boston and reopened part one 3 years ago, part two 2 years ago. It was a 140,000 square foot renovation. All of the public spaces on the 1970s building. It was, I don't know how many of you know the building in Boston? A couple of you do. If you remember back to the way it was before, it was concrete, dark, uninviting, dingy, all of those kind of things. Today, it's a bright, warm, welcoming, open space. Foot traffic increased from before to after, 20% on an average day, 40% on some of our busiest days. So the idea that our public libraries are not welcoming places for everybody, we can put that one to rest right away. But as long as we continue to renovate and innovate and make the spaces better, make them modern, make them feel like they belong to everybody who walks through the door. So the key there is to make them welcoming and warm. The other interesting thing that happened during the renovation, or as a result of the renovation, was just by walking around, it used to be, okay, young families would bring their young kids to the children's library. The older adults and seniors would come in for their programs. You'd have probably some homeless people wandering around. And those were the three main demographic sort of observations that you'd make. Today, people of all ages, people of all backgrounds, people of all races, colors, and so forth. So that is a democratizing space in its own regard. And our job is simply to get out of the way so people can enjoy the space. Yes, there are some rules, and we do occasionally shush people from time to time, but we want a lively, warm, welcoming space. So space is a key to service in that regard, and then the programs that bring them alive. And then the fourth really relates to cultural heritage. When you have incredible records that go back to the founding of Boston, one of the most interesting sort of special collection areas that we've started putting online over the last year has been the anti-slavery collection that the Boston Public Library housed. And this time around, we partnered with an organization that does online transcription service, and they put it out as a crowdsourcing model. So we have people from all over the world, from Tibet, from New York, from DC, helping take these letters from that period and transcribing them, because they're all in script and cursive. So half the people can't even read that anymore. So what we needed was the expertise to bring those letters and documents alive. And so this has been a true public-private partnership in a new way, using technology, using crowdsourcing to make that come to life. So at a high level, those are the four things: reading and literacy, reference and instruction, spaces and programs, and then our cultural heritage. Those are the responsibilities of the public library. So I'm going to stop there because that's gotten a little high level and abstract.
No, that was great, thank you. But you haven't been with us since the beginning, so you don't know that we've done a lot of storytelling and understanding how we bring our authentic selves to our work and to the changes that we want to see. So I would love to hear a little bit from you about, for you, where do libraries and civic responsibility really intersect personally?
I think I have to look back on my own life, my own career to, inform that question. When I came to the U.S. originally, which was 1992, was to pursue a PhD in philosophy. Very practical subject.
Other philosophy majors here? All right.
We'll talk. And to be honest, I actually got a little burnt out on the high-level abstract academic discipline, and wanted to do something more practical, more hands-on. Switched to technology. I worked for a nonprofit organization first in Boston. We built the first this is the early days of the internet, we built the first network of community health organizations across the state, and also worked on, with the Department of Public Health in Massachusetts, the rule set for privacy around HIV de-identification data, where you anonymize the data in order to try and look at trend analysis. So I've always been looking for the social good in terms of what I've been doing. Those are two pretty early examples. I've been out since I was 21, so I've always been out as a gay man in the workplace. And that brings you a level of connectivity to values and different types of oppression that exists systemically in society. So you look at what's going on around you through that lens. I did my 12 years in the private sector, so I apologize for that, but now I'm using my powers for good again. I worked in technology up to about 2008. Financial crisis happens, need to look for something new to do. And I see this job, Chief Technology Officer at the Boston Public Library. Like, that sounds interesting. Applied, got it. Didn't know anyone, hadn't worked in a library since I shelved books in high school. And so some of the lessons that I take away from that are, sometimes if you really want something and it's a really good fit, you just go for it, and it works out. Little did I know, 7 years later, I would be running the institution, which is kind of cool. So yeah, I will wake up in the morning and still pinch myself. This is my 10th year at the library, but 3rd year in the top job. And we can talk about how that happened by accident in a little bit. But it's really important for me to have someone with an academic background, a nonprofit background, technology background, and now with the experience of having worked there for 7 years. That, for right now at least, makes me a pretty good choice, assuming I can do the job well, a pretty good choice to really look at what's next for Boston Public Library at that set of intersection. And for me, it's about doubling down on library as educational institution. We're not a museum. Sometimes we feel like a museum, but we're not really a museum. We're not a school. But we have much more in common with the educational sector than we have anything else. In fact, on the front of the building in Copley Square, it says free to all on the front, which is the absolute commitment to the democratization of knowledge in the mission of the library. But on one of the sides of the building, it also says that education is required to safeguard liberty for the people. I've now just butchered that, but you can look it up on the website. But it really articulates, etched in stone, that we are an educational mission. And I think that's really where the biggest sense of urgency is in our democracy today. If people understood our history more, if they had a greater facility with understanding what it means to be America, what it means to be a democracy, what it means to have regulated capitalism, what it means to have all of these principles in play, then we could have more discourse with people who maybe do not agree with everyone else. It can't stop with discourse, but it has to start with discourse.
Well, that really brings me to this question, really just more specifically in this sort of current environment of disinformation. What really can the public library do to both for people who are coming to the public library, but obviously we're thinking about education specifically as well.
So librarian as fact checker. In some ways, I think our opportunity is made real by two things. Both the Aspen Institute and the Pew Research Center study a lot of these institutions, and we continue to find year over year that libraries remain at the top of the trusted institutions in society. And that's the institution because of the character and integrity of the librarians and staff who work there. And so people trust librarians. So if you want a fact-checked, who better to go and talk to about it? So that's at the individual level. The second thing I think is as we take this notion of programs in our spaces seriously, we can be a convening factor for this type of discourse. At Boston, we started this series earlier this year called The Public Conversation, which is bringing in some intellectuals to have a discussion about the issues of the day. And to get us started, we had Bob Kuttner talking about democracy, capitalism, and globalization. He's an economist. He was the founder of the American Prospect and has a new book out on that subject. So still about books again. So we also had David Hogg, one of the Parkland survivors, come and talk about sensible gun control. I think the library has a place where it can it can live on this trust and bring people in for some hard conversations. Now, I think our obligation long term is to ensure that that we can truly look at all sides of an issue, and that's often a challenge. And the interesting thing is, how do you be a progressive institution? Because the very idea of a public library or public school is itself a progressive idea, yet at the same time ensure that you are in dialogue with people on all sides of an issue.
I'm curious, how many people here have a public library card?
Yay!
There you go.
That's almost everybody.
And for those of you who, can you raise your hand if you're a student in a school or you're a teacher or an administrator in a school or a college institution? Just keep your hand up for a minute if you're working in those environments. How many of you still have, how many of you have libraries in your school? Okay.
How many of you have library staff in those libraries in your school? Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Maybe it's not surprising that they're here because of that. Oh, yeah. How many librarians? Of course. Yes. All right.
Someone will keep me honest because I'm not a librarian yet. So.
Well, in full disclosure, my mother was a school librarian too.
I'm really screwed with that at this point.
This is a little bit of a throwaway question, but not really. I'm curious about your thoughts about really how the public library is changed in the age of digital and internet. Is it more open? Is it less open?
So let me talk about the first part and I'll come back to the openness question in a second. With respect to technology, and you might think, this is something I can talk a little bit about. The public library has three roles with respect to technology. One is just being state-of-the-art and being current like any other organization. We've got to use our own tools to make ourselves a better institution. So that's A. B, often individuals who either don't have access to technology, either they don't have smart devices, they don't have laptops, they don't have broadband or high-speed access at home or on the road. People don't have that. This digital equity gap is actually still incredibly large, and in some urban environments and some rural environments getting much larger, going in the wrong direction. And so where do people turn? They turn to the public library among maybe a couple of other institutions. So we are, for many people who are without those resources, we are their on-ramp to the internet. You cannot apply for a job, you cannot take a course, you cannot interact with government unless you have access to the internet. And access to the internet means a device, a high-speed connection, and the skills. Because if you just have the equipment and the connection, well, who's going to teach you how to do that if you didn't grow up with this stuff? So that really is our role. So with respect to democracy and closing the digital equity gap, libraries have an absolute key role to do that, and it's one that I think librarians and library staff have actually embraced, maybe slowly at first, but more aggressively as we understand the role technology now plays in society. The third relates to the provision of digital content, and this is kind of huge, where I mean, how many of you read a physical book versus an ebook? How many of you read both? So I mean, there is an continually increased demand for access to e-content. People want to read on their devices, and as we look at our numbers, the demand for e-content continues to increase, but unlike 7-8 years ago, the fall off in demand for access to print material has actually stopped going off a cliff. It's still declining a little bit, but I take away from this the fact that today, sometimes we like to read content on a plane or on the beach, on our iPads or tablets or other favorite device. Sometimes we actually want to pick up a physical book and read it. I think in my own way of phrasing that, it's, well, the technical device, that's great for accessing information, but if you want the full experience of reading, that involves the tactile process of turning a page, maybe turning the corner down so you know where to pick back up again. And that's a little different than the e-content. So in that sense, I think where other forms of e-content are yet to be developed, how are we taking all our photography, our prints, putting that online? Our partnership with the Internet Archive is now, I think, 12 years old, and that's something we're very proud of. And this has been a way to take books that are at least out of copyright, put them online, and now we're starting to work on a couple of areas where we believe the legal copyright rules are safe enough to put some things that are in copyright online as well. We had this experience earlier this year during the Kavanaugh hearings. Some of you will recall an individual called Mark Judge had put out a book called Wasted, which everybody suddenly went, we have to read this. There seem to be characters in this book that may be a fictionalized telling of what was going on in high school, and was it as awful as everybody thinks and the allegations certainly suggested, or was it more innocent, and who knows? And so let's get this book. It's out of print. You go to Amazon.com, $2,000 for a book that's out of print. Hardly. One of our librarians says, well, wait a second, I think we have a copy of this in the Boston Public Library. So took it off the shelf, wasn't on the public shelves, on the closed stacks. Takes it down to our scanning center at the Internet Archive and puts it in queue. It's now up online. You can go to archive.org, find the open library, and get in queue to borrow a copy of that. There are, however, like 300 or 400 people in queue for it at the moment, but it does prove the point that we can make these resources available. We can unlock resources that would not otherwise be available for the public good. Now, if 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 institutions did that with the same copy, then maybe we could service the 300 holes faster. So there's no innovative things happening like that to try and unlock knowledge, unlock content, whether it's for a specific generalized education purpose or a more deliberate one within the school system. I didn't answer the openness thing.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Yes, it's much more open now because that the very last example allows us to unlock content in new ways for more people. So I don't think the value has changed. We've always wanted to lend books, and that's really about opening content. But now the power of technology allows us to do that in a more universal way.
Got it. Thank you. In public education, well, I would say in all of our public institutions, all of the public good serving institutions, right, education, health, libraries, they're really under attack and have been for some time. And it makes me, and so just like we have public schools, which there's, can I just say they're under attack and leave it at that? Is that an inside enough comment that I can make? I kind of wondered, like today, if there were no public libraries, which as we heard from Liz, that was a public library, 1300, basically in Morocco. If there was no such thing as a public library today, and somebody came up with this idea and said, hey, let's make libraries so people can have free information and knowledge, how do you think it would be met today?
You're crazy. You can't do that. I do think we would have a large segment of society that would find this absurd for a couple of reasons. One, who's going to pay for it? Secondly, but I own this content. You can't give it away for free. We'd have these kind of reactions to deal with. And so we have to think through, well, why is this a good? Why is this a value? Why is this important? And it's important because I think we believe it makes for a better society where people have equal and free access to knowledge and information. That then allows us to do things with it. Why should it be locked up for those who can afford it? Isn't that elitism? But what we haven't been good at doing is telling our own story. Ironic that, isn't it? That we're not good at telling our own story. And there's also an economic valuing story here that says a more educated populace will earn more money, will get access to better jobs, make for a more successful society. So I think we can take the arguments that are either about the public good in its own right, or arguments that speak to a successful regulated capitalist society that would see the value in making these resources available for everyone.
I think that's a good lesson for us in public education, whether in K-12 or higher ed. I think these are the same issues that we are facing now.
And if we think back to 1848, because we can all do that, right? But what did the founders of the Boston Public Library, what were they thinking? Which of those arguments, maybe in their words, they would have used? These were people who were successful business people. There's one story that says they wanted to get the Irish working class off the streets and just give them something to do. I won't take that personally, but yes, let's get all the stereotypes out, right? But I think in all honesty, if you read through some of the letters and documents, part of that was about ensuring there would be a more educated population. But a little of that was self-interested so that they would be able to work in the workspace in the jobs that were available much more successfully. So I'm not sure the arguments are any different. We may use different words and different language, but I think at the core, it's really about holding these things in balance. And isn't that really the core of what puts, a progressive or more social leaning value system in partnership with a more conservative, economically driven, capitalist value system? It really can speak to both.
Seems like we should have a homework assignment, which is to read some of these arguments back from 1848 and apply some of those to the work that we've been talking about here over the last 3 days. Are there some questions? There's one more mic there, Liz. It's underneath. Do you have some questions ready? We can pass a mic. Start.
We can share one if there isn't.
It's right there underneath. Yeah.
Talking about the public space and keeping books open to the public, can you comment about the dangers of companies like Amazon buying up images and buying up copyright or whatever, and what the danger to democracy might be if a company sort of runs rampant with our intellectual property?
So locking up knowledge so it's not available to everybody is kind of the fundamental evil in this particular circumstance. And this is why we have copyright law. So right now, anything before published before 1923 is in the public domain. Public domain means that it's available to everybody. Our challenge is how do we unlock content where appropriate that's post 1923 up to today. We're not suggesting that the popular fiction, the latest Harry Potter, Fantastic Beasts, because that has commercial viability. So we're not suggesting that needs to be just made available for free without someone paying for it. But we, I think, are suggesting that knowledge that is in books or other objects that is no longer commercially viable should be available and free for everybody to enjoy. And then let's apply that to other forms of content, not just the written word, but we've watched the music industry and other published works grapple with how to control copyright in those contexts. And right now, it very much serves the content owner, and the content owner is typically the publisher, not necessarily the author or the director or the band. We share the wonderful honor of being given the Internet Archive's Hero Award with one other organization for keeping content unlocked. The other organization that did that was the Grateful Dead, who made their concerts available freely. So I'm not sure in what other context you'd have the Grateful Dead and the Boston Public Library sharing an honor, but in the space of open access to content, I'm happy to share the stage there. That's just some thoughts on that topic.
I read about a really cool initiative started in Detroit and is coming to Baltimore through our library, Enoch Pratt, called Wash and Learn, where they're turning laundromats into learning spaces. So I'm just curious, from your perspective, what's an innovative initiative you've taken on in the past 2 years that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, there's some really cool stuff happening in public libraries really around the country. I think New York has also started doing a tie and suit lending program to help people get ready for interviews. So there's this new spirit of innovation, which is, if you can lend it, we should do it kind of approach. There are challenges with some of those. So the one I'm most proud of that we just launched a couple of months ago was a Wi-Fi hotspot lending program. Again, we're not the first to do this, but it's basically a little smart card that you can plug into, and you can have it out for 3 weeks like a regular book, and that's a way of getting people online. It's a pilot program right now, and yet another way where we're taking seriously, I believe, the challenge to try and close this digital equity gap.
In a knowledge economy, is there any good reasons why libraries are not open 24 hours a day?
Cost. So no, I mean, the good reasons, yes, good reasons, I don't think so. I would say that our website is open 24/7. So I think a lot of our digital content is in fact made available, and that's not just borrowing books. That's about taking courses. We've partnered with organizations like the Gale Publishing Company and lynda.com to make online courses available. We have a high school diploma course that we've just launched online. So, answer number one is no, there are no good reasons. Answer number two is part of us is already open 24/7, and the reasons though relate to the costs of opening spaces, the physical spaces on longer hours, and traditionally. Part of the value that a library has to offer is in its staff as much as its spaces, and so I think we've been reluctant to. There's a couple of experiments, but on a wholesale basis, we've been reluctant to open without the staff there to work with people coming in the doors. Although in Boston, we did just open a new branch. Our Chinatown neighborhood now has a physical branch again for the first time since 1955. And if you said to me 8 years ago, we would be opening new locations and not talking about closing them, I would have thought you were crazy. So I think we are actually seeing a renaissance, a rebirth of interest in the value of public libraries and democracy. That maybe 10 years ago we were like, yeah, as we're saying, yeah, the internet's going to take care of it all, and who needs a space anymore? And clearly that's not the case anymore.
Hi, what role, if any, is there for libraries in promoting internet ethics for the people designing the platforms?
Librarians have traditionally been the first ones on the battlefronts of privacy and anonymous access to content. You know, we will not share with anyone what you've checked out or what you're reading. That's a value that is absolute in the library world. And it is one of the few, I think, remaining areas where privacy is valued. We have two pressures right now on this. One is the corporatization of user data and wanting to know how to market to people, because as the more we know about them down to the micro level, the more we can market to them, whether it's by products or by political positions, real or made up. The second pressure is we have a socially connected population that now is used to simply sharing data. It's what we do. We do not think about whether this is a good thing to share what I did last night on my Facebook page or whatever example it is. So I think our role really now is helping run sessions, educate people about how do you protect your personal identity, how do you manage your privacy, can you opt out of certain things, and so that's one area where we have a role. With respect to the fake news question earlier, several of the large public libraries, including some of the academics, have been looking at how do we formalize this fact-checking role. Is there a way to plug into a Google platform or a Facebook platform and be a legitimate, the Snopes of the library world, or that's kind of an idea that's being floated around and piloting. I'm not sure that can scale very well, but that's there too. The next frontier is clearly machine learning, artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, this whole space, and the ethical questions raised by the development of those technologies. Most technology, most innovation far outpaces the ethical or legal discourse, and we're always playing catch up when it comes to those topics. And so I think if we're about information management and much of the information being collected or presented to us is being driven more by algorithms than by people, then we have a duty to understand, what is the librarianship or information science values that need to get preserved as these algorithms and technologies get better and better. I don't have an answer for how, and I'm kind of surprised to realize that maybe some of my philosophy and ethics background actually now merges with the technology and librarianship world. And so, if we don't get involved with this issue, I don't know who else will.
Y'all making me get a workout this morning.
Okay.
I'm just wondering to what extent your library might be in contact with libraries in troubled parts of the world, maybe ones where there is no democracy or where society is falling apart, like Syria or Venezuela or the old Soviet Union, and if so, what those conversations are.
So is that both a national and international question? I do think that red, blue, and purple states in the U.S. Face this sense of uncertainty and threat equally. Although we may take different positions on the different issues. Again, I go back to my earlier point that improving the opportunities for discourse in a trusted environment, in a safe space, is really the key factor that we have to offer. We're not discriminating based upon someone's politics, just as we wouldn't discriminate based upon some other identity that someone has. And free to all has to mean all. If it doesn't mean all, then we're not being faithful to it, and that means people who do not agree or have a different interpretation of why democracy might be under threat. With respect to international discourse, some of my colleagues are more involved in that, and it wouldn't really be fair for me to comment on something I don't know. But we certainly share the concerns about where in other parts of the world is there not free access to information, and how can we support those efforts.
You touched on so many issues that we're working in directly in the sphere of the public school. And it's what I have seen, especially in California, the ratio of students to librarians is 7,000 to 1. It's a shameful ratio. And I'm just wondering, commenting on the intersection of the respect for librarianship, where there is a need for that mediated expertise, or discarding it, even in well-resourced schools, that if we allow our search results to be controlled by algorithms and not by the human, like where is all of that for the, for the food chain, for students to understand what their access and their rights are to information?
I do think we see some worrying trends in this area. And I think our field of librarianship may have is not completely innocent in that transition. Maybe because we've been having an identity crisis about what is the role of the librarian in this new technologically empowered world. So my advice is that there are 3 points of buy-in that need to happen to see that role reemerge more strongly within the public education sector. It's librarians themselves, I believe, understanding what that role is, and that it's not simply in-classroom curriculum assistance or in-classroom curriculum support, but it's this broader educational mission. Now, schools are under pressure. It's not because in many cases the principal doesn't want to do that, or it's in many cases not because the superintendent doesn't want to do that. But these are the other two intersection points where I've seen this work well, is when you have a principal who gets it and has the resources to make it happen. So it needs both, but equally at the highest levels of the school district to understand that, well, yes, we need to have a strategy for the school library role, the collection, the space, and the staff. That's an ideal. I've just painted an ideal picture, and not one that's easy to get to without a lot of work.
Hi. I have a quick question. It might actually not be a quick question, but I imagine that there are quite a few fans of libraries in the room here today.
Oh my God, really?
Recognizing the challenges with public funding for things like libraries, what are 1 to 2 things folks in this room can do when they go home to support the long-term health of libraries in their community?
I agree, and I think our opportunity really is, well, I think we can try and hold the line on where public funding for public libraries and school libraries might be. We're not going to move that needle all that much within the context of public funding. Therefore, the only place to go is to the private sector and individuals of wealth and individuals of means who care deeply about this work for whatever their own personal motivation is. So I do think, think in the broadest way possible about how to solve the funding challenges when you get into that topic. What's the biggest thing you can do to support the library? Understand that it probably does more than you think it does. So here's my challenge back is, go find out something you didn't know about what your local library does, and see how you feel about that. And then the second thing is, go tell everybody else about it. The more we are used, the stronger our argument becomes about looking for more funding and increasing the quality of service. And so it's a I guess it's a use it or lose it kind of approach, really, that we need to think about. So, but equally, challenge your library to do more. It is your library, after all. As and I am very fond of saying in Boston, we're just the custodians of the library. This belongs to the people. All those 23 million objects, those belong to the people of Boston, Massachusetts, not to the library, not to city government. And so it's up to us to be good custodians on your behalf. And so you can challenge your library to A, understand what it's doing, and maybe it's doing things that you don't know. B, help it look for new funding, and then C, challenge it to be more than it already is.
That's really interesting. Actually, along those lines, I was thinking about, as we think about designing institutions, that you always have to bring in the voices of people who have been disserved or not served by those institutions, so that you can think about how to redesign them. And I think about sort of the autodidact community. So I think my mother was a librarian, and she would always say that, education is free. All you need is 25 cents and a library card, and you can go and get all that you want. And I think about things like our incarcerated populations, and where does the library sort of interface with people who haven't been served by our current education system and now who currently reside in things like prisons, and what is our responsibility to giving them access to, and how do you guys work with institutions like that?
The first thing when it comes to responsibilities for underserved populations is we have to own it. We have to recognize that this is our responsibility. And so for me, I talked about free to all earlier. And again, that all has to mean everybody, whether they're able to come through the front door or not. And if they're incarcerated, clearly they're not coming through the front door. And so this becomes now a much more extroverted, outreach-oriented mission than it would have been 20, 30, 40 years ago. The librarians have always been doing a little of this work here and there, but maybe not at scale and not on the level that today's challenges need. And so we have partnered, one example, with the Department of Youth Services in Massachusetts, who are charged with managing the facilities that deal with incarcerated youth. And how do we have our librarians take collections, take books to those spaces and be in those spaces, and within the rules that are allowable, do that. So free to all isn't sitting inside a building waiting for someone to come in, sitting behind a desk, only dealing with books. It's going out who does not have access and finding out what is the right way to overcome that. And the other thing I will say is it can't be just us in a vacuum deciding that. We have to be doing that with the community who's affected And, so it has got to be a collaborative partnership. That's what I'll say on that point is, if we get it, we can be good partners. If we don't get it, challenge us so that we do get it and can begin to do that work more.
Outside of digitizing books, where do you see the role of libraries that have included makerspaces in their areas, and how this might be able to provide access to tools that to communities that don't otherwise have access?
Yeah, so the original making with respect to a book is writing. So this is, we've always been about as much about reading and writing together, and so as we think through these principles and try and reimagine them in today's world, it's support for different types of makerspaces. There are many examples across the country. Some are digital only. Many of ours are more digital oriented with 3D printers and green screen rooms for making a production video or some audio recording work. Most urban environments, most of our cities have some sort of a branch system that's extensive. And so it's not just about a single library building making a strategic decision. So in our case, it's like, which neighborhood is going to benefit most from having these resources if I can't spread them across all? And if I can spread them across all, make sure there's a designated location in different neighborhoods who would benefit most from having access to these resources. So it's about being very intentional about where you locate resources, again, to try and overcome inequities that have come about from whatever past system or economic trend or urban planning issue that has occurred. But yeah, maker spaces are a huge part of it. We had, I was visiting even Toronto. They have fabulous maker spaces, and trying to locate these across the different neighborhoods and branches. So yeah, but that requires new skills, and I think it's been a learning experience for our staff to realize that, yeah, we can take this thing on, we can take that thing on, but there's only so much we can scale without additional resources. The third part of this is work with the community at large, find the right partner to help run those programs and teach those classes. So we don't have to do everything ourselves. We can be the facilitator, the convener, the hoster, and in some cases teach and be the information provider, but we don't have to do it all ourselves.
You said something about like libraries and communities. I just want to know, like, what way can we kind of show the people in those communities the value in a library if they don't necessarily see it? And sometimes, like, how do we even let them know that a library is possibly going to their, because in Oakland, they don't like make any announcements like, hey, we're going to build a library, and the library just pops up, and then other people who aren't interested in that type of information go into their phones. Like, how do we get that to be, I guess, more marketable to people who don't see the value in the library?
Yeah, thank you. We've got a PR problem. Those that know our libraries love our libraries. Half the people that know and love our libraries and half the people that don't have this antiquated image of what a library does and have to offer, and don't necessarily understand the community center notion, the workforce development and skills and engine that it can be, the after school programming and summer learning agenda that the libraries have. And so the two best ways to solve a PR problem are, ensure that there's good marketing collateral, but more importantly, it's word of mouth. So as I was saying to the questioner over here, go find out what your library is doing and go either challenge it or celebrate it or do both. This is absolutely a get the word out and think of it as your resource that you can leverage for some aspect of your work, your hobbies, your community that you want to see it do.
Thank you, David. I'm going to ask the last question here because we're out of time. But I'm here, as I'm listening to the questions that we all have, and of course, again, we've been here thinking very deeply about education, about social justice, about the transformation of education. It's one thing to talk. I'm just thinking of, there's civic responsibility, right? That's what we should be doing, and then we come to this point where, I know for a fact in Oakland, I think the statistic is something like, half of the public schools have no library in them. So, what is your, what are your thoughts, or what is your answer to say, how do we move from civic responsibility, right, which is doing the right thing with the public good, to the social justice issue? Because, I think, and again, in the case of Oakland, it's not even just saying PR, it's saying, we've been some examples are, just to kind of let you know what I'm thinking, many of us were inspired by the libraries like in Ferguson and in Baltimore, and those were the institutions that opened their doors. So, I'm just curious your thoughts there.
We absolutely have this role when we step up in society at a time of immense pressure or social unrest, or everything from the floods in Houston to violence on the streets. It's very gratifying to realize that Carla Hayden, who's now the Librarian of Congress, was the librarian who ran the Baltimore Library at the time of dealing with their challenges, which are national challenges and issues that we all have to be focused on. So, and there are other examples, whether it's dealing with the homeless, the list goes on and on and on. And all politics is local at the end of the day. So we've had a conversation today about, I think, the role of libraries in society, and that we share this joint education space together. And writ large, to me, that's about lifelong learning. And at the end of the day, how do you bring about social change? How do you bring about political change? At the end of the day, that's showing up to meetings, that's advocating for a position, and that's voting. And that's ultimately what we come back to. And that's, again, this is an issue that people of all political stripes and affiliations, in theory, can get behind. If we speak the same language, if we understand that maybe our motivations are different, but hopefully we all want the same thing, with a more functioning, better democracy where everybody has a chance to get ahead.
Great. Thank you so much. Lindsay, please join us for a round of applause here for having David with us. It is truly an honor. Thank you so much. And I think, Liz, you set this up beautifully earlier this morning when you talked about, this is new input into what we've been thinking. Also, kind of, wasn't it nice to just sort of have a little bit of a respite from what we were been talking and doing and prototyping and thinking, here's, kind of some new ideas and new challenges. So thank you so much. And I think that, the public good is so important today, public schools, public universities. And I know that there's a lot of work, and I encourage all of you also, there's so much more we could be doing in the intersection of public education and public libraries. I think that we're not doing yet. So, someday Monday, right? We're about to transition there, so these should be on your to-do list. So thank you again.
Thanks so much.